There's an entire generation of people who remember both rotary phones and the first iPhone launch, and psychologists can't quite figure out where to put them. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you don't fit neatly into Gen X or Millennial. You're what researchers are calling a Xennial, and your brain developed during a technological shift that created something genuinely unusual. You grew up in a world where your embarrassing moments just faded into memory instead of living forever on social media. That 7th grade haircut, that breakup, that drunk night at a party, there's no photo evidence, it just exists in the stories people tell. This creates a fundamentally different relationship with your past. Research on autobiographical memory suggests that the way we store and recall personal experiences is actually quite fluid. Our brains are designed to edit memories, keep what matters, and let the rest fade. When everything is permanently documented and searchable, that natural process gets complicated in ways we're still trying to understand. Consider the implications of this on your daily life. You spent your childhood playing outside until the streetlights came on. No cell phone to call home, no GPS tracker on your wrist. Your parents had no idea where you were for hours at a time, and that was completely normal. But then you were in your 20s when smartphones arrived, and suddenly everyone expected you to be reachable at all times. That shift happened fast, not gradually, suddenly. And it happened right when your brain was finishing its development, right when you were forming your adult identity. That timing matters more than people realize. A study published in Developmental Psychology found that the experiences you have during your late teens and early 20s have an outsized impact on how you see the world for the rest of your life. This period, called the reminiscence bump, is when your brain is particularly good at forming strong, lasting memories. For Xennials, this critical period happened to coincide with the rise of the internet. The shift from analog to digital, the moment when the entire social contract around privacy and connection started to change. You learned to type on actual typewriters in school. You remember the sound of a dial-up modem connecting that specific screech that meant you were about to access this massive network of information. But you also remember having to choose between using the phone and using the internet because they shared the same line. The internet wasn't always there. It was something you had to actively decide to use, something that required intention and time. Compare that to how kids today experience technology. They've never known a world without instant access to everything. Their brains developed in an environment where the digital and physical worlds were always overlapping. But here's where things get messy. You also carry the skepticism and self-reliance of Gen X. You were raised by parents who, statistically speaking, were more likely to be divorced than any previous generation. You saw institutions fail. You saw companies lay off workers who'd been loyal for decades. You watched the news tell you that the world was a dangerous place. This created a baseline level of distrust that shaped how you see authority, how you approach relationships, how you make decisions. And this shows up in ways you might not even notice. Research on generational psychology suggests that Xennials tend to be more comfortable with ambiguity than both Gen X and Millennials. You don't expect things to be permanent. You don't expect systems to work perfectly. You learned early that you need to figure things out yourself, because help isn't always coming. But you also learned that technology could be a tool for connection, not just isolation. You were online during the early days of message boards and chat rooms. Back when the internet felt like this weird experimental space, where people from all over the world could actually talk to each other, that combination is rare. You have the independence of someone who grew up before helicopter parenting became standard. But you also have the technological fluency of someone who adapted to digital life. While your brain was still flexible enough to really absorb it, you're not a digital native like Gen Z. You remember the before, but you're also not stuck in analog thinking, like older generations sometimes are. You translated yourself from one world into another. And that translation process changed something fundamental about how you think. Consider what this means for how you handle stress. You grew up without the constant feedback loop of social media. When you were anxious or upset, you had to sit with it. You had to call a friend on a landline and hope they were home. You had to wait. And waiting taught you something about emotional regulation that's actually harder to develop. When you can instantly message someone or scroll through content to distract yourself, a study in the Journal of Youth and Adolescence found that people who experienced both pre-digital and digital adolescence tend to have different patterns of emotional processing compared to those who only knew one or the other. Your relationship with work is different too. You entered the job market right around the dot-com boom and bust. You saw people get rich overnight from internet startups, and you saw those same companies collapse just as fast. You learned that career paths aren't linear, that the rules can change completely in just a few years. This created a weird mix of ambition and caution. You want to succeed, but you're not naive about it. You know that things fall apart. You've seen it happen. And this affects how you parent if you have kids. You remember the freedom of your own childhood, running around the neighborhood without supervision. But you also live in a world that tells you constantly that danger is everywhere. You want to give your kids independence, but you also feel the pressure to monitor and protect. You know what it's like to not have a phone, but you also understand why a kid might need one now. You're trying to balance two completely different models of childhood, and there's no guidebook for that. But here's the thing that really defines the Xennial experience. You deal with a paradox that's honestly pretty unusual. You have the self-reliance and skepticism of Gen X because you grew up before helicopter parenting became standard, before every moment was documented, before failure meant permanent digital evidence. However, you also reached adulthood during the early days of the internet, when technology was still thought to connect everyone, when it felt like anything was possible, when the future seemed genuinely exciting instead of overwhelming. It's odd to find yourself there, independent and cooperative, doubtful yet optimistic, digital but analog. What seems to define Xennials is this ability to hold contradictions without it. Feeling weird, you can appreciate both privacy and connection. You understand both the value of being unreachable and the convenience of constant communication. You remember when getting lost meant actually being lost. No GPS to save you, and you also can't imagine driving somewhere new without looking up directions first. These aren't opposing ideas to you. They're just different tools for different situations. You code switch between the analog and digital world without even thinking about it. That flexibility shows up in how you communicate too. You're comfortable with email, but you also don't mind picking up the phone. You can text, but you remember when you had to actually plan to meet someone at a specific time and place, because there was no way to update them if things changed. You adapted to new forms of communication without completely abandoning the old ones. And psychologically, that makes you pretty good at navigating different social contexts. You can adjust your communication style based on who you're talking to and what the ethnic situation requires. The research on cognitive flexibility supports this. Studies show that people who experienced significant environmental changes during their formative years tend to develop stronger adaptive skills. Your brain literally built different pathways because it had to process both analog and digital information during the time when it was most plastic, most capable of forming new connections. You're not better than other generations, but you are different in specific, measurable ways. And this matters now more than ever because the world keeps changing faster than anyone can predict. The skills that Xennials developed by accident, by happening to be born at exactly the right time to experience this massive shift, those are the skills everyone needs now. The ability to adapt without losing yourself. The ability to use technology without being consumed by it. The ability to hold contradictions and uncertainty without falling apart. If you're a Xennial, you probably feel like you don't quite fit in anywhere. Too young for Gen X, too old for millennials. It's not a fault. That's actually the defining feature of your generation's experience. You exist in the space between, and that space taught you something valuable about what it means to be human in a world that refuses to stay still. The environment in which you were raised doesn't necessarily have to be the one in which you live forever. How to adapt without losing yourself in the process. Subscribe for more psychology deep dives.